Good morning. Hi, everybody. Want to get started, so we stay on schedule here. My name is Stacy. Welcome. I'm from Brookings, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, which produces the annual Festival of Books. We hope that you'll enjoy the festival and that you'll provide feedback about this year's event. The link to our online survey is available at SouthDakotaBookFestival.com, and QR codes can be found at our information tables. You can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. To donate, visit sdhumanities.org or stop at the SDHC information booth at the Lodge at Deadwood. With your gift, you can enter our drawing for the original festival guide cover painting, which I'm guessing you probably have all seen, by local artist Gary Steinley. Donate $50 for your first raffle entry and $10 for each entry after that. The festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who've already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide. Today's program is called Talking Fairy Tales and a sneak peek at the puppets of Spelhorst. I am going to introduce someone that I think a lot of you know, Lori Walsh. Lori Walsh is a host and senior producer of In the Moment on South Dakota Public Broadcasting. In 8 years of public radio, she has interviewed roughly 8,000 guests, including Gloria Steinem, Ted Kuzer, Terry Gross, and Dave Eggers. She is a 2022 Bush Fellow, and she lives in Sioux Falls with the tortoise known as the Entity. And here's Lori Walsh.
Well, I need Kate. I don't have Kate's intro. Thank you very much. And now we get to add Kate DiCamillo to our list of people that I have interviewed. But this is not our first interview.
Did we do something on the radio?
I was a print journalist, and you came to Sioux Falls to do one book, South Dakota, for Edward Tulane, and I talked to you before you came for that. And I was in the room at the Washington Pavilion when every child in the school district showed up, and you walked throughout.
That was we were talking about it last night. It was anybody around for the first time I came, and it was just utterly magical. The kids were so present. There were 900 of them in that auditorium, and they stayed. I mean, they made huge connections. We connected. They made big thematic connections. It was magical, and I talk about it all the time out in the world. You know, that was also one of my favorite quotes happened in there. A little girl raised her hand in the question and answer period and asked how old I was, and I said I'm 50, and she looked at me and she said, "But how did that happen?" And I used that line for like the next, and now I'm 59, so it's not as fun. It's like, boy, how did that happen? Yeah.
Let's hope it keeps happening.
Yeah, right.
Keep happening and keep happening. Yeah. And after all the last 3 or 4 years that we've been through, we're even more grateful to the things that are still happening.
And to be together with a group of readers in a room is just a powerful thing. So I'm so grateful to all of y'all for getting up this morning and coming in here. And so grateful to you for, because I woke up and I thought, what do I do today? And it's like, oh yeah, Lori will be in charge. That's great. So yeah.
We're going to talk to the grown-ups for a minute in the room, because Ann Patchett famously during the pandemic went through and read every Kate DiCamillo book to look at the canon, and it gave her delight and comfort and peace. And you are dear friends. Your newest book is dedicated to her.
Yeah.
Her newest book is dedicated to you.
Yeah.
Adults have known for a long time that you're really writing books for them too.
Right, but we needed Ann Patchett to say it for it to be true. Now it's true. Yeah. It's like that has been one of the great gifts of my adulthood is Ann as a friend. So.
Yeah. So I was asking how many teachers were in the room earlier, how many librarians.
Can I see the teachers for a minute?
Right.
And can I see the librarians too? Teachers and librarians together. Can you leave your hands up if you read to the kids when they come into? Can we do a round of applause for those teachers and librarians? it matters so much. And I was a kid who got read to at home, who I had a mom who bought me books, took me to the library, and I lived for getting read to in school. So, and I think you're saving somebody's life, and they're not going to be able to tell you that until they're 40, and then they won't find you. So, yeah, I'll tell you now.
I want to add booksellers or independent bookstore owners to the list.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because my brother, we'll pretend that he's here. He was a bookseller his whole life in Minnesota. He worked for B. Dalton back when there was one, and then he worked for Barnes & Noble forever. And the way he would put your books in the hands of other people, and he would just buy 20 at a time, or he would order 100 at the time and say, this is what I'm doing for Christmas. I'm making sure everyone reads Despereaux. And not just because you were a Minnesota author, but because he believed in it so much.
And that's what we call in the trade, that's more than hand selling, but that's hand selling. That's the person that is like on the floor of the bookstore when the parent comes in and says, what book should I get? And they put it, and that means I'm sitting here next to you because of hand selling, because of teachers, because of librarians. Yeah.
And who was it, I can't remember, rather famously would ask kids if it was a librarian, or did I read this in a book? Who said, what do you have in your pockets? If the kid didn't know what to read, she would say, what's in your pockets? And then when they showed them what was in their pockets,
they would know
they would know which book to put in their hands.
Yeah, that's great.
Right? That's a librarian right there.
That's great.
That is a librarian. Well, we live in an era where the librarians are under, and the teachers are under a lot of pressure. Book banning is taken a new energy in our state, absolutely. And there are communities who have, in our community of Brookings recently, there was some book challenges and some bans, and the community showed up at the school board to really stand against that and try to keep it from happening in their place. Have you been affected by, and you and your colleagues in the children's lit world, really thinking about because part of what you hear when there's a book banning, someone says, oh, well, their books will just sell more now. But what I'm hearing you saying is libraries, schools, I mean, not everybody who wants your book has the money to buy your book or would ever come across your book unless every student in the state of South Dakota was handed it as part of the Young Readers program. How do you think about book banning in 2023?
Every time, and anytime I go out in public and talk about this comes up now. It is on everybody's mind, and the image that always flashes into my head is at the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery in D.C. There is a painting of Toni Morrison, and has anybody stood in front of that? This is like maybe 3 years ago, right before the pandemic. I was standing there looking at her, and people that I didn't know, a young couple, were standing next to me, and the guy turned to me and said, "It looks like we're being told that we better do something right." And so every time book banning comes up, I think about the fact that you can't get the bluest eye in a high school library in Florida, and I think about that portrait of Toni Morrison, and I think about that guy saying, we're being told to do something. So all I can say is that I know for a fact that I would not be here talking to you if books saved my life, period, full stop. And so to think about not being able to get a book that the 8-year-old me needed, it makes me feel panicky and terrified. So it's all I know to do is to keep on pushing back and saying it saves lives,
Yeah. Thank you to the librarians who are fighting that every day, and the teachers as well. I know that it is not easy. You mentioned the bluest eye, and a few years ago we had a candidate who was running for, I think for Congress in South Dakota, and I interviewed her, and she mentioned that these books should not be in the school, and I said, well, I'd like you to give me an example, because she had a very nasty story about what was in the content of these books. And she said, The Bluest Eye. And I just blanked on who wrote it, just blanked. And I was like, the bluest eye. So I took a quick break in radio, which we can't do today. So if we blank, you just get to watch it. But I said, we'll be right back. And I quick Googled, and I was like, oh. And I came back, and I said, you mean Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison? And she said, I've never heard of him. So how often is it that if you just pick up the book and read it,
Right.
And figure out who that author is and what that book is really about, the scary part goes away.
Right, and it's also that thing of, I don't know, do y'all ever listen to The Moth on public radio? And sometimes when I'm listening to that, I think this is the only hope, is for us to have a person that you think that you don't have anything in common with get up and tell you a personal story about their lives, and then you understand them. And that's the same thing the book does. It's just like, I always say, a story helps me to see myself, it helps me to see somebody else, and it helps me to see that there aren't that many differences, even though it might seem wildly different in the beginning, you know? Yeah. And it's so, and you're right, that takes away the fear once you read the book, you know?
I think there is a lot in your book that I would, I think it might be popular today to call it reparenting, but I sort of call it the anti-gaslighting moments in Kate DiCamillo's books, when I think in Tale of Despereaux, Mig says something and she's not understood, and the line is, it's a terrible thing to not be understood. And I think the first time I read that, I was like, yes, finally somebody recognizes that when you're a kid and you're trying to say something and nobody's listening and they don't understand you, that it is a terrible thing to not be understood.
It is. It's terrifying, and it makes me think about, I get asked all the time, why are mice so important in children's books? And it's just like, are you kidding? Because that's what it feels like to be a kid, right? You're kind of like, you're pushed to the side. Or take, do y'all know Edward Tulane? And you think about that thing where you can't move and you can't speak, and it feels that way sometimes too,
Or Miggery is told, what you want is not, nobody cares what you want. Like, what you want is not going to, I want this. Well, that's not being considered here.
Yeah.
Or Despereaux is the great disappointment.
Yeah.
To his mother, always. At the moment of his birth, he is a disappointment.
Right.
And aren't we all afraid of that?
Right. Such a disappointment. Yeah.
Don't we all need our parents or our teachers or our adults to say to us, you're not a disappointment?
Yep.
Because we're afraid of it all the time.
Yep. I am, yeah.
I want to talk about fairy tales, and I particularly want to bring attention to this forthcoming book called The Puppets of Spelhorst, which I'm just so delighted to have in my hand and have it shipped to my door so I could read it and fall in love with it already. So
that's so nice of you to say.
I just wait until you get this. And it's a Normandy tale, which means there's going to be more, right?
Right. Not with these puppets, but somewhere in the land of Normandy. Yeah. So yeah.
You heard it here.
Well,
first.
I made it up, so you can say it any way you want. I was like, it's just.
I'll be correcting.
No one from Normandy is going to say, "Wait a minute." Yeah.
You don't understand. I will be correcting people forever. They'll be like, "It's a Normandy tale." I'm like, "No, Kate told me that it was Normandy in Deadwood," but she also said you can say whatever you want. Well, that's interesting because in the beginning I was going to ask you. It starts with the sea captain who is finding these puppets on display and purchases them, and I wanted to know why you started with the sea captain, and that might be the answer there, that this is not just a series about the puppets, that there are humans who are interacting with them, and we'll see that throughout this book. But tell me a little bit about Normandy.
Well, I don't know what I can tell you about Normandy, but let's do the sea captain. Yeah.
Perfect.
And let's do how I write without knowing what I'm doing. Let's really pause on that for a while. So when you say why a sea captain, this particular book started. And I've spent the last couple days talking to students, which has been fantastic, and talking to them about what to do if they want to be a writer. And one of the things that I always say is keep a notebook. And what goes in the notebook for me, the notebook exists to remind me to keep everything open all the time. My eyes, my ears, my
my brain, my heart. And it's also an excellent vehicle for eavesdropping. And anything that I see that I think might turn into a story, I will put in that book. And I was over at a friend's house, and in her workroom, she's an artist, she had an owl puppet and also a wolf puppet. And I'm like, ooh, can I borrow those puppets? Because I looked at them and I could tell there was a story. And so I've had them now for 4 years. This is how long it takes to write. And I put them in my office, and I just waited, and I had them at the back of the notebook too, the wolf, the owl. And so these puppets in here, it's actually a wolf, an owl, a boy, a girl, and a king. And so eventually I got the first line of the story once. What is the once there was?
Once there was a sea captain.
What? No, once there was a wolf, I think. Once, no, right here.
I'm starting at Act 1.
Right there. Once there was a king and a wolf and a girl. Here, I'll just read it to you. Yeah.
Yes.
Once there was a king and a wolf, and a girl with a shepherd's crook, and a boy with an arrow and a bow, and also there was an owl. The king had a beard made of human hair. The wolf's teeth were bared in a snarl. The girl wore a green cloak. The arrows in the boy's quiver were sharp enough to prick a finger. As for the owl, his feathers were real. The king and the wolf and the girl and the boy and the owl lay jumbled together at the bottom of a trunk that had the word Spelhorst stenciled in gold letters on its lid and sides. The king and the wolf and the girl and the boy and the owl were puppets, and they were waiting for a story to begin. And so as soon as I had that, then I had the voice of it, and so then I was off and running. And I had that word Spelhorst. That was a word that had been transferred from notebook to notebook to notebook, and it's like, oh, it belongs with the puppets. Okay, then what does it mean? What does Spelhorst mean? And finally, I answer your question, where did the sea captain come from? Yeah. That's where he came from the fact that I knew the word Spelhorst was in it, and I figured out once I got that beginning that it was stenciled on the side of a trunk. Okay, who'd the trunk belong to then? Somebody named Spelhorst, a sea captain. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's not
you
a.
Want to applaud? It's okay.
No. There's nothing to applaud. It would be it would be great. We were talking last night in this room about, whether I outline or whether I just fly by the seat of my pants, and I fly by the seat of my pants, and it's terrifying. So yeah.
Okay, but you have said famously it's not about you, Pumpkin, or somebody
right.
told you that.
My best friend.
And part of it is what gets me so excited, and I think what gets people is to. Where they want to applaud when they just hear you start telling the story and then read it, and all of a sudden we're like all into that story, is that you can immediately tap into, at least by the time it gets to us, you are immediately tapping into in 2 pages the universe of fairy tales, an oral history tradition, everything that we know about life to be true. And
you're terrifying me. Yeah.
All of a sudden, we're there because we're bringing ourselves to the book as well as readers. Like, we show up and it's not just Kate. It's not just this beautiful illustration.
It has nothing to do with Kate, really.
It is now about everything that I know about fairy tales and my own childhood and my own, the Sea Captain and Jenny Linsky, which is one of my favorite book series. I'm bringing him into it in my mind, and I'm wondering how they're the same or they're different. And we're all part of it with you.
Yeah, isn't that great? That's the magic. Is like it's like we form this community. Whether I'm sitting in Deadwood and looking at y'all, but like if you never see me, never talk to me, we're there together in the book. Yeah.
Talk about fairy tales a little bit and the importance of fairy tales in your life and as a reader and just as a human being. Because they're just so essential to me. This is my favorite thing to talk about.
I love
Hans Christian Andersen, and that's what I go back and read and reread, for myself, and also always trying to like figure out how he did it. I love Maurice Sendak did illustrated the juniper tree. Do y'all know that 2-volume that just is just like blows your socks off?
Randall.
I think it's Randall Jarrell. I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. And Grimm's fairy tales illustrated by him, and it's spectacular. So I was a kid who. Yes, got read to by my mother, and my father made up fairy tales. So that was a gift that he gave me. So I was steeped in fairy tales. My father also, so I have this wolf and this owl that I took from Carla and still haven't given back. And I'm like, now I need them because I'm going to take, I'll give them back soon. But my dad arrived once with a bunch of puppets and a puppet stage theater, and there was a king in there. So it's just like, so I didn't even think of that until I was like halfway through this. So I'm tapping into, what we, in the neighborhood, we would put on puppet shows,
Right.
Yeah.
At one point, there are 2 children in this book, and they're going into the woods as part of the plot, and they say, "Oh, we're in, there's a deep mystery here. We're like Hansel and Gretel, only we're us." And Hansel and Gretel is my favorite fairy tale, and if you read the Juniper Tree, the version in the Juniper Tree is my favorite version of Hansel and Gretel. And I thought, of course, Kate would mention Hansel and Gretel. So, do you have a favorite fairy tale? That's a Grimm. That's not.
That's a
Hans
Grimm.
Christian Andersen.
And I love the Grimms, even though they terrified me too. And we had a record of fairy tales, and the Juniper Tree itself.
It's dark.
That is a
It's not
terrifying.
children's.
And you listen to somebody read that on a record, and you think, oh no. So I do love the Grimm fairy tales, but I'm more of a Hans Christian Andersen kind of insensibility, and I love the Steadfast Tin Soldier. Yeah. So do y'all know that one? It's just it's heartbreaking and beautiful. And and I think it was Adam Gopnik in the New Yorker wrote a while ago. Somebody in the New Yorker wrote about how there would be no Toy Story, without Hans Christian Andersen. That kind of like inanimate object that's really animate. So.
Do you have a favorite collection of Hans Christian Andersen in your library?
It is, I can't remember who the translator is, but it's a beautiful penguin with French flaps, a reissue of paperback.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned the darkness of a fairy tale, and there's darkness in all of our lives, and then there's darkness in your books as well. But
I hear that all the time.
It's the light.
So
There's darkness in the world. We must, value the light or go toward the light. So let's not talk about darkness. Let's talk about
let's not.
Light and wonder, and also what fairy tales give us is.
They give us a way through the woods, and they also, I think maybe it was Walter Benjamin, but I can't remember who said this about the fairy tale teaches us that we can meet our fate with high spirits and cunning, and so it shows you that there's a way through,
Also the binding power of words. And in this, there's one of my favorite. I have triple dog-eared this page. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to see which one it is. I love. Raise your hand if you dog-ear. Raise your hand if you underline. Yeah. Raise your hand if you reread and so you date your underlinings because you watch yourself grow up in the book, So yeah.
If you don't do that yet, do that now.
Yeah.
This is the king is on the mantle. He's a puppet, and the puppets are being taken down one by one. And I won't tell you why because you just have to read the book. And it says, on the mantle, His Majesty the King had given some thought to his circumstances and had grown quite agitated. How can they be taken away, one by one? It does not seem right to me. I command someone to make it different. What kind of different do you want it to be, said the girl. I want it to be a world where songs are sung every day. I want us to be together. I command the world to be different. And the girl says, Emma is writing a story with all of us in it. We will be together again.
Yeah.
And that is what I would send to my brother. I would say, I command the world to be different. And if you're a child, that makes so much sense. And if you're an adult,
Yeah, our hearts still sing that, you know.
hearts still sing that.
Yeah.
And you say,
Yeah.
I don't want them to be taken away
Yeah.
one by one.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
command it to be different.
Or I command it to be different. Yeah.
And then there's also the binding power of words. The command doesn't work, but the curse, the blessing in fairy tales, that's a different kind of use of words,
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
blessing
The blessing.
about wonder and light.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thanks for making me cry. I thought we were going to talk about happy things.
We
That's what
are.
you said. Yeah.
we are, because this the wolf has very sharp teeth and is
That's all the wolf ever talks about. She keeps on saying, my teeth are well and truly sharp. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little tired of hearing
Yeah, right.
about the wolf being that sort of thing. What does it mean when, like, here in South Dakota, I'm sure we're not the only state, but I'm obviously biased to think that we've done it really well, better than many other states, with every child. What grade?
That is
got the
so
book? Is it
astonishing.
third grade or fourth grade?
Third grade.
Third grade. Every single third grader in the state of South Dakota had this book. And I'm not saying they all read every page, but it was discussed in their classroom. It was part of their library. It was part of their lives.
They got to take the book home.
They got to take
You
the book
got
home
to
and
own
keep it.
a book. That's what South Dakota did. Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, that is amazing. And for me to get to be a part of that is just, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
They all grow up with this. And again, if you made those notes, you're going to come back and read that when you're in 6th grade, maybe, or when you're
And then
in
not again until you're like, you know,
an adult. Maybe
Yeah.
you have your own children, and
Yeah.
now you're going to read it out loud to them as an adult, or your own nieces or nephews, or you're going to volunteer at a school and you're going to read it aloud to someone. What happens when we read aloud? And we talked about it a little bit already, but let's say more about in the classroom and in the library, and for the parents who are sitting next to their children tucked in their arms, taking the time to put your phone down and stop worrying about what's for dinner, and just read.
yeah, it's and I've never been able to come up with the language for the magic, but that happens. But as a parent, you know it. As a teacher, you know it. As a librarian, you know it. There's something extraordinary about reading aloud. It's a gift to the person who's reading, and it's a gift to the person who's listening, and something subterranean happens. And we connect. It's like a third space, you know? It's just like everybody kind of just puts their burdens down, and you enter into this safe third space. And when we were in Rapid City the first night, I can't keep track of the days, but we did a public event, and there was a teacher in there that talked about how she had a student that something terrible had happened to, and another teacher had said, "What are you going to do when he comes back to school?" And she said, "I'm going to read to him." And it will, like, so obliquely you talk about these big things, and that's what story lets us do, talk about things that we don't have any language for. Kids don't have any language for, and guess what? Adults don't have any language for it either, but story gives us a way to talk about it. And when it's read out loud, it's the power of that is magnified 1,000-fold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about snow.
I love snow. Yeah.
Because your journey from Florida to Minnesota, and one of the reasons that you stay here, I saw in a recent interview, is because you really like snow. And one of my favorite things about this festival is that I buy all these books, and then I go home and I'm like, it can snow now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's finally time, and I'm just ready for the seasons to change. I have my plan for the rest of the year and what I'm going to read, and it's going to snow. And you wrote my favorite poem of all time, and most people don't think of you as a poet, but it's
And I'm
called
not. Yeah.
Snow Aldo.
Yeah.
And it's in a book called Thanks and Giving by Marlo Thomas, I think, Harry Bliss, my friend and yours,
Yes.
illustrated it.
Yeah.
And it is just a magical tribute to snow. So I
Yeah.
thought I would ask you to talk a little bit about, we had such a tough winter last year, but
Yeah,
it's okay.
It is okay. I fell quite a bit. That's interesting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually, I fell right before I was going to do, I don't, how many of kids or adults saw the video that I did before coming here? And we were going to film that, and I fell on my face, and I said to the publicist, I think that maybe we need to wait I look pretty scraped up, and she said, oh, it'll be fine by Friday. And then I sent her a picture of my face, and she said, right, we'll reschedule. But you know, for me, coming from Florida, you know, which is where I grew up, and moving to Minnesota and not in any way being prepared for it. I mean, I remember the first time it was 5 below, and I stood at the window and kind of wept and said, what do I do? And my roommate said, you layer and you step outside. You know, that's what you do. But I have really come to love the cold weather. I've really come to love the snow. And part of it is just what you said. It's like, now you have all your books, now it can snow. It is great for writing, you know, it's just, it still seems magical to me. Yeah.
You were, as a child, like me, actually, I had croup, is what they called, I don't know, maybe they still call it that, and they put me in a little tent.
Yep, the oxygen tent, yeah.
And sent me to the hospital. There's no visitation, so if you were in the hospital when we were kids, you know, your mom and dad couldn't come there, but like, you know, 2 hours a day. And then the rest of the time, there was no visitation.
Yeah, you're alone, yeah.
And I know this because there's a, you know, in my scrapbook, my dad collected, you know, the hospital guide and the rules for parents, and this picture of me in the tent at the hospital. It was this most pathetic, sad, weepy face where you can tell that child has been totally abandoned.
Yeah.
Finally, my dad got tired of taking us to the hospital. We didn't have health insurance, for one thing, but also because they had to leave their child. And he took some bunk beds and he taped or stapled or nailed, whatever. He was a handy guy.
Yeah.
And he put plastic all around it, and they put a humidifier in there, and that's where I lived.
Wow.
It was in that little space, and they had a leaf from the table that they would slide in, and that's where my food would be, because I couldn't leave because I couldn't breathe. And I spent, you know, weeks in the croup tent.
And they slid books in there too.
And they
I'm
slid
guessing.
books in there. Well, my older brother was the one who would read to me, and it was James and the Giant Peach, or the last of the really great Wang Doodles. And he would be the one who would read to me. You also had chronic pneumonia.
Yep.
And that's what has your mother move you to Florida. Your father doesn't come. But do you look back at the time when you were sick in the way that I do, in the sense that, like, I kind of miss that little tent with the humid. In fact, if I'm really having a bad week, like, I'll just go home and turn the humidifier on really high and like shut all the doors and just sit in there and say, I can't go anywhere because that's it. I've had enough. Do you have?
I
like,
don't.
No,
I do not miss it. I have to say no. And I was just so terrified. I was so terrified. I was afraid of the nurses. I was just saying this to a friend the other day. I remember I grew up. We didn't have a TV until I was in 4th grade, and I remember being in the hospital, and they gave me Kool-Aid, something else no one would ever have offered me at home. And it's like, oh boy. And I was allowed to come out to the nurses' station and sit on this little green couch, and I was going to get to watch Captain Kangaroo. And I was like out of my mind with joy. And then I spilled the Kool-Aid on the couch. And so I was sent back to my room, and I'm still like, I'm in trouble with the nurses. I disappointed the nurses. Yeah. So I was just so afraid all the time that there wasn't a lot of comfort in it. And, you know, however, like when we're talking about that, the first time that I came to South Dakota and did, you know, that big thing in Sioux City with the Sioux Falls, sorry, with 900 kids. It's like, it was so interesting because that group of kids, every audience has its own personality. And those kids, as I stood up there and talked about being sick, and talked about my father not being part of the family, they made the connection, like, explicitly in the question and answer session afterwards. These bad things that happened to you actually gave you something, and you would not be a writer if they were able to do that. And so I think about those hard things, and it's like, it's probably, true for you. You would not be doing what you were doing if you weren't like in the bunk bed oxygen tent, Yeah. It gave you something. And that's it takes a long time to see that in life, and it's amazing when, a young kid can make that connection. These things that hurt you actually give you something.
Yeah. Because of Winn-Dixie, I don't know that it would have hit as big as it did if it didn't have that homesickness in it. Obviously, it's about a dog, and it's so smart, and it's so funny, and it's so loving, but it is also about loss, and you wrote it when you were deeply homesick. And I think that's one of the things, like, something changed with Winn-Dixie. There was all kinds of wonderful children's literature, and I don't mean to imply that you invented something new.
No, I didn't know.
But what hit in that book in that particular year was what was needed in children's literature. That's my opinion.
That was the most astonishing thing. You have to understand that, like, I was somebody who worked in a book warehouse, a book distributor, so no one could have had a better idea for what was going to happen to a first-time novel, like for middle grade. We served the whole upper Midwest in that book distributorship, and a new, like, Lois Lowry, Catherine Patterson, we would get like 24 hardcover copies. That's what would, And so I thought, if I was really, really lucky, that 5,000 copies of Winn-Dixie would get sold, and that would be enough for me then to, like, earn out my advance, and then they would let me do another one. So what happened with Winn-Dixie, I still haven't gotten my head around, because it was this thing where it just got passed from hand to hand, and it was like, it changed my life, Yeah.
What are you working on next? How many things are you working on at the same time?
To say that I'm working on them at the same time is kind of like erroneous. It's like I work in short, like I'm working on even shorter fairy tales now. Nice. And so I'll do a draft, I'll put it aside, I'll go and work on another story that's in, like, the first draft, second draft stage. So I rewrite so much so that I can always have something on the loom that I'm does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does that keep you from stopping? Does it keep you from, like, overthinking it? Or because you said something earlier that I want to bring back to, and I will ask for some questions here in the last 10 minutes. So if you have a question you would like to ask Kate DiCamillo, think about it and get it ready. We're almost to that point. But you said something about just being always open and always, your eyes are open, your ears are open. And that's kind of like walking around the world without skin to protect you in some ways. And so I wanted to ask you, like, does that hurt? Like, to go into the world that open all the time and to receive and have your notebook, is the notebook the protector of that?
I know what you're getting at. It's a really interesting question. The notebook protects it, but the notebook is also a reminder to stay open, and it's also that thing where the alchemy of being able to get away from myself by telling the story. So it's like the story protects me at the same, that you have to be open to receive it, but to get to tell the story gets me away from myself, connects me to something deeper and smarter than I am, and so there's a safety in that, Yeah. And I remember Catherine Patterson saying, there's no way to do this except put the armor on, take the armor off, put the armor on, take the armor off. You've got to have the hide of a rhinoceros. Wow, do you think I'm going to be able to say that? And you've also got to have your heart absolutely exposed, on, off, Yeah.
So if there's a child who comes to you and says, like, I am writing and it's really hard because I'm emotionally, like, all the time, is there a way to Because in the 10 years when you weren't writing, but you were saying that you were a writer.
Yes.
Which is sort of a famous story about wearing a black turtleneck and saying, I'm a writer, but not actually doing it.
Yes, that's
I like
exactly
to think
right.
you were preparing, you know, like stuff was happening in your head, even though you weren't.
Maybe,
you know,
yeah.
Maybe. You were 20.
Yeah.
I don't know. But for the youngest writers who want to do this, how do you enter into it in a way that is healthy?
That's a really good way to phrase it. So the first way to enter into it healthily is to and I got this message early on, I just ignored it, writing is not about making yourself seen. You know, it's not about you, Pumpkin. It's about entering, you know, this stream of stories and putting yourself aside. So you don't do it to make somebody look at you. You do it to look at the world, and that's you know, the physical embodiment of that for me is the Notebook, and that's why I talk so much about it to adults and kids. It's just like that's what it's a reminder of. And then the rest of it is just this thing, and I talked about this last night too, where it's like there's no right or wrong way to do this. The only wrong way to do it is if you want to write and you're not doing it. That's the only wrong way. But after that, all bets are off. It is like there's no way to find your way through telling a story. You teach yourself how to do it. Other people can listen, other people can offer suggestions, but it is ultimately this very personal journey, and you're going to do it your way. I've talked a lot about, you know, the thing that works for me is to do 2 pages a day. That is not a prescription. That is just the thing that works for me, you know? Yeah.
I think that is beautiful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, okay.
What questions do you want to ask Kate? I will come around with the microphone. How's that? Is that going to mess up anything if I... Okay. I will come to you so she can hear what you have to say. This is Oliver. Go ahead and say your name and then ask your question.
I am Oliver, and my question is, how did you get the idea of, getting the mouse in the book? How did you get that idea?
Yeah, so in Tale of Despero, where did I get the idea that Despero would be a mouse? The story started for me. How old are you, Oliver? 6. So the story started for me when I went to visit my best friend, and because of When Dixie had just been published, my best friend's son was 8 years old at the time, and he had never, ever been impressed with me at all. But all of a sudden, here I was with my name on a book, and he was a big reader. And he, at the end of that visit, asked me if he could have a word with me alone in his room. And it's like, sure. So we went into his room, and he said, I have an excellent idea for a story. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's the story of an unlikely hero with exceptionally large ears. And I said, what happens to the hero? And he's like, I don't know. That's why I want you to write the book. And so Luke, that's his name, Luke Bailey's all grown up now. He didn't say a mouse, but I couldn't imagine a more unlikely hero than a mouse. And I found the phrase unlikely hero very charming, and there was a lot of magic in it. It went in the back of the book, right? And so that's where I started. And by the time that book got published and then won the Newbery, Luke was 12 years old, I think. And I made him come to the Newbery banquet. And he had to stand up in front of 1,000 librarians, and he was not happy. Yeah.
All right, another question here.
One of my favorite, well, it's not a protagonist, but one of my favorite characters is Answelica the goat. How did you come up with her name?
Yeah, it's funny. I got asked this question last night, too, and it's just like this is I have no idea where the names come from. And it's like almost everything about writing is hard for me except for that. And they just pop into my head. It's another reason I always have the notebook. I have no idea where Answelica came from, and I've never Googled it because I was afraid to see where my subconscious took it from, you know. But it just popped into my head. And she came along with it, her whole personality. Yeah.
What about Gloria Dump?
Yeah, Gloria Dump, one of my all-time favorite characters. Sometimes kids want to know who's your favorite character, and I can never answer that question. But I would like to go and sit in Gloria Dump's backyard and talk to her. Where did the name come from? I don't know. But I think about her all the time. Yeah, and would like to be in her backyard. Yeah.
More question over here.
My name is Cody, and where did you get like the castle part from? Like,
Yeah, so Cody wants to know where the castle part came from in Tale of Despero. And, so I have the phrase unlikely hero, and then heroes start making me think of times of yore with, fairy tales. Fairy tales make me think of castles. And then boom, there I am in a castle. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking, oh no, I'm not the kind of writer who knows how to work their way around a castle. And I shouldn't be here. But I was so glad I went to that castle. And it was a scary book to write because I thought, I don't know how to write about castles. But guess what? I figured it out with a small mouse's help. Yeah.
Do you get scared when you're writing something in a scene that's really scary and
I don't know that I get scared in a scene. I get scared thinking, am I going to be able to tell this story? And this would be an all right story if somebody else was telling it. That's the kind of fear that I have,
We have a question from the back of the room here.
Thanks. You talked about the magical connection, teachers reading, librarians reading to kids. Would you recommend adults gather in groups and read aloud to each other?
Would I recommend that? I would wholeheartedly endorse that. And a lot of times at the end of events, I'll go home and say, go home and read to your adult, because we forget how much we need it too. And I hear a lot of stories of people taking children's books into hospitals and nursing homes where people are in pain and can't concentrate for a long period of time. And a children's novel is a better book to read out loud because you can, it's easier to concentrate on. So yes, read to your adult. Boy, we desperately need it. Yeah.
One more question before we probably should give the room up to our next session. Anyone else have a question? I think that's oh, there we go.
So last night, my daughter and I came up, and I'm so nervous right now. I can talk really good in front of children, but when it comes to an adult, I get so nervous. And when I was a senior in college, our reading professor gave us a book order. And I ordered my first book for my classroom. I didn't know where I was going to teach, what grade. And I ordered Because of Winn-Dixie. And I hadn't read it before. And I read it, and I thought, kids have to read this book. Kids have to hear this book. And so it's almost always the book that I start the year off with, because it's a non-negotiable. I read out loud 20 minutes a day to my fourth graders.
Oh,
and I just want to say thank you for that, because you made me a better teacher, even though I hadn't started teaching yet. And just thank you. I don't know what to say.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
You're making me cry, so I thank you back. And the whole room wants to thank you for that 20 minutes, non-negotiable, every day of reading out loud. We all thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, all of you, for coming here so early in the morning. And thanks for making me cry. You said, I've got the Kleenex. Where are they? I said, what are we? Yeah. And thank you to everything that you do for books, but everything that all of y'all do for books. When you put a book in somebody else's hand, you're saving their life, So, yeah. Yep.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.